career when I was a social worker doing direct client service work, and I would, someone would ask what I did, and then I'd tell them, and usually they wouldn't give me this look, not quite this bad, but I'd always saying something like, oh, how can you do that? Or I could never do that, or kind of some of those platitudes. But you will always wonder kind of underneath if this is what they're actually thinking. And now that I do consulting, people don't have quite such an emotional response to me telling them I'm a consultant. Okay. So social service work, and I'm going to call it social work, even if you're not a social worker, or work in service of folks who have certain struggles. In healthcare, we call them social determinants of health. But people who are homeless, or have domestic violence, have been abused, or are facing poverty, or any marginalized populations who are facing oppression. Facets to it, but the jobs we do are quite singular and quite important, and put us into contact with content and people and things and situations that are emotionally difficult for anyone. They are emotionally difficult. And so anyway, I think this meme is hilarious, especially the part about having to record it all. So it's one thing that people are coming to you with all this stuff that's happening to them, and then you got to make sure to write it all down too. So that's kind of adds insult to injury. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about our nervous system and how we process what's going on around us. And before we jump into that, I just want to go over some terminology so that we're all speaking the same language. And a lot of these words that we're going to go over tend to get used interchangeably. People will talk about stress or trauma or fatigue or burnout, and not distinguish kind of between those concepts. And I just want to make sure folks know that there are some important differences. And so when we're talking about chronic stress, which I'm very concerned about for frontline workers right now, it's this repeated exposure to stress and to situations to the point where we are emotionally reacting and our body is releasing hormones, and we are kind of riding this roller coaster. And over time, chronic stress can really wear down all of the systems of the body. And so super important to identify when it's happening to us and to be able to find ways to resolve that for ourselves, or at least mitigate it. This part about scientists thinking that our stress response was not designed to be constantly activated. Yeah, so let's take a second to think about that. When we were prehistoric people, maybe out on the hunt or at our campsite, and we came into contact with a predator, maybe it was a tiger or a bear or who knows what, something pretty scary that could eat us probably, then what happens is your fight, flight, or freeze instinct kicks in and releases hormones so that you can do one of those things to protect and save yourself. And that is an evolutionary benefit that we have all inherited. It is very functional. It's great that we can do that. And our bodies can do it super quick. So in the amygdala, which is kind of a primitive part of our brain, it can respond to threat seconds before your prefrontal cortex, which is where you do some of your executive functioning. So your reasoning, your planning, your containing your emotions, holding your tongue from saying that thing that you really shouldn't say. Your amygdala responds more quickly than those other parts of your brain to save you. And so if it's a lion or a tiger or a bear, great, because now either you made it away from the threat or you didn't make it away from the threat. But if you did make it away from the threat, then you have some time to regroup, to pull it back together, to be away from that threat, and to get kind of back to your baseline. But what is happening in the world today, and even before this pandemic happened in social service work, is that the stimulation, the threat, the stress, the exposure to grief is ongoing. So it's 40 hours a week or more for some social workers. And so how do we, with these built-in systems of response, contain what we're being exposed to and keep ourselves healthy? And that's really the challenge that we're facing now, because on top of whatever challenges existed for you before, you now have these additional concerns, which are legitimate and are significant. So let's move on and talk a little bit about these other pieces of terminology, or work impact concepts, if you will. And the first being secondary trauma. So in being in social services, you are likely exposed to folks who have experienced trauma. And just in hearing their stories, providing comfort, listening, being around them, offering service, offering your compassion, you are exposed to things that can then, Vicki, yes, you will get the slides from this presentation. I think Teresa will be getting those out to you after this presentation's over. But trauma is communicable. So if you're serving folks who have had these issues and many times recently have experienced trauma of their own, you can over time come to show the same symptoms as your clients. So if you're seeing an awful lot of clients who have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, you can start developing some of those symptoms simply by virtue of your closeness to what's going on for those folks. It doesn't have to happen that way though, but it can. Compassion fatigue is kind of a related concept, and that has to do with as caregivers, social service workers, needing to empathize over and over and over again with the tough things that we're seeing around us. Can we over time kind of lose our ability to do that? And how I think of compassion fatigue and kind of mentally imagine it is if you have a pitcher of water and you are slowly pouring it out until there's none left. And then somebody comes with a glass and wants you to fill up the glass again, and you got nothing to give. And you don't even have anything for yourself now too. So compassion fatigue, again, just meaning that you've given all that there is to give, and now there's nothing left. And both of these things can all three, chronic stress, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, can all lead to burnout. Burnout can come from a number of different places though. So even if you're not a social worker or a caregiver, you can be exposed to burnout as a piece of delivery. Certainly, these concepts and these realities can lead over time to you not being able to have longevity in a career that means something to you. And burnout has lots of you. So if you community, so doing what you can proactively to keep from reaching that point, and then if you do reach that point, knowing what to do about it are super important for you as a social worker. Okay, let's just take a breath. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what a happy nervous system looks like. Let's see. So a happy nervous system looks like this. It is people, it's not that people don't face challenges, but it's that they face them and then they can release from them and then they can engage again. And it doesn't push them outside of their coping. And there's a beautiful quote in Zen Buddhism about being like water over rocks, that when we face challenges, we should be like water over rocks. And I think of that when I see this slide, because you can see how it looks like a gentle wave where with charge and release. And when people are in a good resilient zone and their nervous system is balanced and they're able to regulate themselves, what you get are social service workers who can be empathetic, who can listen, who can see the gray area of what's happening with a client or what a client's talking about or what's happening with them, and kind of deal in that gray area, find some comfort in the gray area. You also have folks who can access their executive functioning. We talked about that a little bit. So their ability to plan, to reason, to think things through, to be proactive. This is the kind of nervous system that you want to be in the same room with. It feels good. And many times when you're around a nervous system like that, your system will flow to match it. So in effect, we can lend our good balanced nervous system to our clients when they are, when they are experiencing. Well, I'll show you what they oftentimes are experiencing, and we can too. So this is what it looks like when a nervous system is out of balance, there's been a traumatic event or enough chronic stress to where it doesn't even take a traumatic event. It just takes, a trigger perhaps to get things out of whack. And some folks call this an amygdala hijack. So we talked about that the amygdala is what cues our fight or flight or flee response or freeze response. And so when this is happening and you're bumped out of your resilient zone, you tend to get bumped one way or the other, and sometimes both in the same day. So for those of you who have been feeling lethargic, or others of you who have had just a ton of energy and don't know where to put it, I don't know those people right now. I've mainly been hearing from the folks who are lethargic, and I've been experiencing that. That can be as a result of us over time being bumped out of our resilient zone. And then the question is kind of, how do we get ourselves back in line? How do we respond to this as quickly as possible? How do we kind of be thoughtful about preventing this from happening? And what if this is happening when you're with a client? I mean, what are your options of what to do then? And this is a social service worker. If you're in this place and you're trying to work with a client, your ability to be flexible, to be creative is really curtailed. So probably a lot of black and white thinking, good and bad, lots of judgment being placed, not flexible, probably poor planning, poor reasoning, kind of emotional responses to things, yeah, really just impacting your decision making overall. So this is the kind of thing we're going to talk about resolving for ourselves and kind of bringing back into our resilient zone. Okay. All right, so I don't want us to get hung up too much on part two. Part two is the kind of what are we up against, what's going on around us, why is this information so crucial to us right now? And instinctively and on many levels, I think you all probably already understand why we're having this presentation today. But let's take a minute and just see this through. So these are some additional stressors that are happening right now, and they're in addition to the existing stressors of your work. So whatever was going on for you before, now we've got this kind of layered on top. And I've changed the color on a couple of them because I just want to make sure to hit on them. Some of them are somewhat self-explanatory. But this idea of, well, this rapid change that's happening all around us and in our workplaces right now, it is stressful. So if you've had changes in staffing, changes in structure, changes in the services that you're offering, maybe changes in the demand on your services, all of those things kind of add up and create additional pressure on us and additional decision making that we have to do in our daily lives. And so that is certainly happening right now. And then this piece about values, I wanted to take a second with too. And I've been thinking quite a bit about this one. You know, our values within ourselves, our values as social service workers, you know, the idea of being patient-centered in the middle of a pandemic, what does that mean? You know, there's these things that guide our work and that we feel strongly about, and then how do you relate them to what's happening around you now? So what about your need for safety? What about your need for security? How much of yourself and your time and your energy and your life can you dedicate to your clients right now? Is it fair to even ask you to dedicate? Even for some folks, the idea of going into work, say at a residential facility, involves risk. And is that okay with you, or is it not? And how do we make those decisions? Again, it's a very personal kind of conversation to have with yourself and your family and your coworkers, but not to take for granted that many workers today, whether they're in healthcare or nonprofits or government services, are really torn about how they do their job and how they best support their clients and take care of themselves and their families. Okay, so this slide is a little bit of a diversion, and I'm going to just tell you up front, I'm still thinking it through. You know, anyone you're getting a webinar from these days is kind of creating content on the fly. And so there's a beauty in that. But one of the downsides is I'm not exactly sure how this fits into the presentation. And I'm just going to be open with you about that. But I think it does. And I think it's super important. So if you all figure out how this fits into my presentation, if you could let me know, I'd really appreciate that. Again, I think it's good stuff or I wouldn't bother. But I've been reflecting on how, you know, my behaviors have changed since we've been going through this public health crisis. I really didn't eat Cheetos in bed secretively before this happened, I promise. And it made me think about the clients that I've served and everything that they were going through way before this even happened. I mean, domestic violence victims or the homeless folks I've worked with or people who have co-occurring issues of mental health and drug and alcohol dependence. I mean, a lot of the things that I've been going through, to a small degree compared to them, really, they've been experiencing for so long, sometimes decades. You know, the isolation, the interrupted support networks, this loneliness, not being able to get the very basic things they need, like medication or toilet paper. I mean, there's just so many connections now that so many folks who maybe haven't been exposed to the experience of the clients that we serve are now getting a taste of what it's like. And I don't wish that on anyone, but I think there's some good connections to be made there and some good compassion to feel and some good understanding to mine as far as, you know, sometimes our clients are doing things that we don't understand, that we inevitably make quick judgments about, or that are super frustrating. And it's, for me, so much easier now to understand why that was happening because I'm doing it. I'm doing it a lot. So the poor planning or the not being able to think things through or being so tired and just not being able to get things done or being grouchy. I mean, it just seems like now's a window into that experience that I've never had. All right. So again, if you guys figure out why I'm thinking so much about this, feel free to put it in the chat box. Okay. So now I really do want you to put some stuff in the chat box. This is, in thinking about what we're up against, these are the impacts that we may already be facing or that we may face in the future from chronic stress, vicarious trauma, from compassion fatigue, from burnout. And so I want to give you a second to read over them. And I'm interested if any of this is kind of jumping out to you, either because you're experiencing it or because you see it happening to the folks around you. And again, I don't want you to share anything that you feel like you shouldn't be sharing, but I mean, I think it would be very uncommon for someone not to have felt any of this, particularly during this time. So again, just kind of in the spirit of being open and honest about what we're going through together. If you feel like putting in the chat box something that's kind of close to your heart, please do. I think some of the ones that stick out for me and that I've experienced before is, yeah, the restlessness. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, maybe even leading to some insomnia or some anxiety, just not kind of knowing what to do with yourself. I've had some headaches, which I'm not super prone to, but that's been happening for me. I know before, so I did direct client service work for about 8 years, and I've been down this road. So I've been down the burnout road and back again. What was happening for me was lack of sleep, nightmares, awful nightmares about clients. And my eye would start twitching. I know that's a weird one. It's not on there, but for me, I know it's a big red flag that like I've pushed beyond my limits. And I kept doing my job for a good year after I was cooked, and I didn't do my job well. And so the reason I tell you this is just, it is super common. And these are kind of, it's not that if you've experienced any of these things, you're done for, but this is a way for your body to tell you, I need some help. Like, we need to do something about this. You need to call in the cavalry, whatever that looks like for you. But yeah, sleep disturbances, Jessica, absolutely. Linda, sadness. Yeah, just being flat out sad. Yeah, the fridge, you're getting a lot of visits to the fridge these days. Okay, so there is a reason why people stress eat, and it's because it does work. Now, the problem is it works in the moment. So we are going to talk about some personal strategies for dealing with stress, and some of them like stress eating, or you know, there's other things that we do, extra glass of wine. I mean, those things do work, but you know, over time, what is the consequence? Something to think about. Let's see, disorientation and sense of time. Absolutely. That I hear that an awful lot too. So like all of our structures and all of our sense of what was going to come next is so out of whack right now. It just feels, to me, it feels like Groundhog Day. Like we're doing the same thing over and over again. Okay, here comes another Zoom meeting. Okay, now we're, you know, making grilled cheese for the kid. Okay, now the dog needs out. And it's all kind of compressed and condensed into this format that's so foreign. And that's for me. And I've been privileged in so many ways throughout this pandemic. I can't imagine for other folks what it's like to get up every morning and just try to make it through the day. I'll tell you one other kind of personal piece is at the beginning of the pandemic, I made these beautiful lists for my stepchildren of things we were going to do every day and the quality time we were going to have, and you know, how we were going to really enrich their homeschooling experience. And I mean, I'm quite proud that I did that, but me today, looking back on me back then, is like, I don't know, I try to have compassion with that earlier me, but it's just not possible. So again, how do we have those conversations with ourselves and be realistic and be accepting of our situation and ourselves? Okay. Thank you all for putting these things in the chat box. I appreciate it. Okay. So now we are getting into some of the like proactive solution finding part. If you are a nurse on this webinar, you've been waiting this whole time for this part. You've been super frustrated with the earlier part. Whenever I present to nurses, they get really frustrated with the like lead up. They want to know, what do you want me to do? Make me an algorithm, I'll do it. Be quiet, get out of my way. That's kind of the like take charge and get her done attitude. So I don't know if you've had the experience of Nicolas Cage in this meme, but you do not want to be in this place. Like, this is not a good look. This is not what we want for ourselves. This is not what we want for our clients. This is a person who is going to go forth and potentially do some harm to somebody. So how do we stay away from this? All right, let me just check our time and make sure we're all right. Okay, we're good. So let's talk a little bit about resiliency, okay? Because this is, I think, in many ways, the antidote for what's ailing us right now. So resiliency is the process of adapting well to adversity and trauma. It's your ability to bounce back. And that's what we're talking about right now. We're not talking about avoiding struggles or avoiding grief and pain, but kind of meeting it where it needs to be met, and then being able to metabolize and move on from it, and not letting it take us down. And when I think of resiliency, one of the things that I think of is kind of a tree in a hurricane. So follow me here. A tree in a hurricane, if you have a big strong tree that is inflexible and you know, again, just really strong and rooted and not going anywhere, and the hurricane blows through, that is the tree that gets uprooted and blown over. But if you have a tree that is flexible, that sways with the wind, that can kind of go with the flow, that can adapt and evolve and hang in there, that's the tree that makes it. And so how can we be those kind of swaying trees right now, and not those like rigid, inflexible, gonna do it, you know, type of trees, if you will. So yeah, so how do we build that within ourselves? How do we get there from where we are now? Okay. So there's a couple of places where we can look to build resilience and where we can focus our attention. And just know that when you focus on resilience, when you're intentional about it, when you choose it, when you put it into place in your life, your ability to do that takes you away from burnout. And burnout as a larger concept, like burnout is not being able to be there for yourself, kind of being out of control, being unaware, potentially being the kind of person who could be harmful to a client or to your family or your community, being unhealthy. I mean, these are the kinds of choices that we're making, and we make them every day. So they're not these aha moments where you do it once a week and then you're cool. But every day we move closer or further away from our healthy kind of integrated self. And while I wasn't sure I was going to mention this to you guys, there's a funny one that I do talk about in these presentations, which is used to be when I was working in social work, doing direct client service, if somebody really needed something or I was really on a tight timeline, I would not allow myself a bio break. I would not go pee so that I could keep working because I felt a deep commitment to what I was doing. And I know that others of you have done this because I've presented on this and other people have started laughing and admitted that they do it too. So that is a small decision that you are making that takes you towards burnout. And it's a silly one. But this goes to illustrate the point of, you know, every day when we don't take time for ourselves to get a drink of water, or we grab the emergency chocolate, which isn't terrible, instead of the emergency orange, you know, all these little decisions, you know, add up to something in our lives, professionally and personally. And so how can we be really mindful about those choices and make them in a way that pushes us toward being the person we want to be? Okay, so the 3 places we're going to hit on with as much time as we have, which is about 45 minutes, is the work that you're doing at work with your clients and patients, the work that, your personal life, so what you're doing outside of the workplace, and then how your employer can be a part of this equation, what they can be doing to help you make good decisions and kind of keep you on a path to feeling good and doing good. And so we're going to start with these personal strategies. So these are the things that you're going to do outside of work or sometimes inside of work, but they're not necessarily about the workplace. And I don't know, I think this might be my favorite meme of all of the memes. Anyway, this is a person whose personal strategies are not working so great for them. All right. And if you will use your chat box again, something I'm interested in is what you do to relieve stress. It can be at work or outside work, at home. Like, what are the things that are working for you right now that are making you feel healthy, get through this time? What are the kind of functional things that you figured out for yourself? I think if we can, gardening. Thank you, Bobby. Sometimes I think, I mean, it's not that we don't know we should be doing exercising or we should be eating well, but just hearing from other folks what they figured out, I think can sometimes trigger us to try new things. Walking, working out, reading in the evening. Yeah, reading in the evening instead of like putting a bunch of stuff into your brain. I'm thinking of news again, right before you go to sleep. I'm not sure that's the best thing for us to be doing now. Reading a daily devotional. So for those of you who have a strong spiritual connection, reading in me time, wine helps indeed. Doing my nails, Netflix. Yeah, totally, you guys. I mean, this is the good stuff. And I think having enough of this and kind of figuring out new opportunities while we're going through this is super important. Reaching out to different people to talk every day, video games, shopping, thinking about concerts after the pandemic. Yeah, thinking about what it's going to be like. I don't know when this will be over. I don't think anybody knows when this will be over or how we will kind of open things up. But what are those things that you intend to do and that you look forward to doing? thank you all so much for putting into the chat box. And, you know, this graphic is really just to illustrate that as stress increases and pushes down on you, you have to increase the amount of support that you're receiving or that you're giving yourself. Super simple concept. People have really struggled with this. So what I see oftentimes in social service work, and I have done it, is that as the stress of your work or your family or your relationship or your kiddos or your schooling or whatever increases, social workers have this like inner drive to face it and double down and make it work and figure it out and be strong, and be that really rigid tree in the hurricane. And you know, many times we just need to back off the flame. We just got to back it up, like do some deep breathing, get into downward dog, like whatever that looks like for you. Get your gardening gloves on, get some space, get some perspective, and then maybe re-engage after you've figured out what that can look like with balance maintained. I mean, many of us can run toward the fire in a reckless way and things get all out of whack for us. But I think it takes real planning and thoughtfulness and usually a lot of outside support too, to make these kind of careers work, to make our lives work when all of this is going on in the background and the foreground. So that to me is the real challenge of facing the additional stress, but bringing in what you need to be able to do that in a healthy way. Okay, so you guys put in the things that you're doing to keep yourselves safe and healthy and up to the challenge of every day. These are some of the ones that I wanted to suggest to you. And I put some in red, not because they're more important, but because I wanted to take a second on them. So one of them is this 3 things you're grateful for. That's something that my family has started to do at the dinner table, and we don't do it every night. We do it whenever somebody remembers. But it's kind of reminding yourself of what's going well. And there's actually research to show that if you are consistent about this, that this can make you feel more joy. So we're trying it. I think it is making us feel more joy. So I wanted to pass it on to you all. The focus on purpose, resiliency builder. Again, there's an awful lot of research, a wonderful book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And I should have put it in the resource page. I don't think I did. But just an incredible story about hope and how if we focus on the purpose of what we're doing, we can get through incredibly tough times. So he was a survivor of concentration camps and noticed that the folks who tended to survive were people who knew one day that there would be an end to the suffering. They didn't know when, but they found purpose in the suffering that they were enduring. And that was something that really kind of helped them emerge from what they went through in a way that they were still intact and frankly still alive. So incredibly powerful, this focus on purpose. And then the last one, which is silly compared to the focus on purpose, is Hammock Time. And so I know I'm super fortunate to be able to have a hammock. But it's this, do you have a place where you can go where it's quiet and it's peaceful and you can kind of get yourself back together, whether it's a hammock or it's a beanbag or it's a bedroom or whatever. I think it's really important that we have those places to kind of do some thinking, maybe meditate or breathe or just something super basic to bring ourselves kind of back around and get us back in that resilient zone. Okay, so we're on part 5. There are 6 total parts. So we're on the next to the last part, and we've got, let's see, about 30 more minutes together. I'm hopeful to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. And this is resiliency building at work, okay? And, you know, this is a nurse who's setting some really good, strong boundaries here, right? And she's letting everyone know what her boundaries are and that they're good for you too, which is the truth. When we set good, strong boundaries, it's good for everyone. So let's talk about what we can do at work. So these work strategies are a little different than the personal strategies. The personal strategies were kind of self-care type stuff and, you know, fun and supportive things that we can infuse into our life. The work strategies I wanted to be a little different, and these are really like, how can we work with clients in an authentic, effective way that bolsters our resiliency, that doesn't add to the cumulative impact of the stress, that kind of some of the vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue that we might be feeling, particularly now. So these strategies are a good idea whether we're in a pandemic or before it or after it. These are things that I suggest no matter what, but I think they're particularly helpful now. And the first one's being really about things that you own, things that you control within your service delivery behavior. You don't own or control. What happens to them in the future, their safety. There's a lot of things that you cannot wrap your arms around, but here are some that you can, and that you can be in charge of for yourself and keep tabs on. So the first one being boundaries, separation, triggers, awareness of internal states. And one of the things, well, and I want to throw this question out to you. In thinking about these concepts and these ways of working, are there certain clients that trigger you over and over and over again, that you have had experience? And it doesn't have to be, well, clients meaning for direct client service providers. Those could be clients at a shelter or clients at a behavioral health center. You know, say you work in government and your client is a different branch of government or a nonprofit. I mean, clients as a bigger concept. Are there certain people, let's say, that trigger you? And so knowing what those types of clients are, what those types of triggers are, employees, yes, okay. So how do we have an awareness of that and kind of unpack that for ourselves before it takes us on this emotional journey, before we get thrown outside of what we can metabolize and our nervous system is kind of all over the place? I'll tell you, for me, the type of client that I feel triggered by is a client that is really passive and who I can't seem to wrap my arms around what it would take for them to get some motion going in their life. And it's a lot of clients that are that way, particularly initially when you're working with them. So, you know, just knowing if there are some clients that rub you the wrong way, and then why that is, and having a chance to process that. And I know I'm focusing a lot on triggers here, but it's the same for separation. Are there certain clients where you can't get that professional separation from them? Maybe it's a client that reminds you of your own circumstance. So within this pandemic, if you have a lot of fear and concern for your parents, that they might be infected or be sick, you know, when a client is telling you about that, are you relating too closely to that and having trouble realizing that their experience really is different from yours, and that they have a whole life and a whole landscape going on around them that is different from your own, that their life is not your life? because when you start blurring that space, that's a huge way to put yourself in jeopardy of kind of taking on that vicarious trauma, because your distance and your ability to say, this is me, that is you, becomes mitigated. I'm trying to think if there's any additional information I want to give you about this particular one. I think that's it on this one, but these are all things that you get to have a say in, that you get to control for yourself. I'll tell you one other thing that I do want to talk about here is the ability to offer reflective supervision, or to seek that out as an employee, or to seek it out outside of your agency, and that being a really important kind of way to delve into this. So reflective supervision, some of you may have more or less familiarity with what it is, but it's a different way to go about supervising employees who have an awful lot of emotional connection with clients. So in social service agencies, shelters, counseling centers, food banks, this, in my opinion, is the most effective way to provide supervision, and it is more of a partnering rather than a hierarchical structure of supervisor and supervisee, and it gives the supervisee a chance to really explore on their own emotional experience of the work, and what the relationship with the client looks like, kind of how they're being triggered, how their boundaries may or may not be holding up, you know, just really bring to the forefront their emotional experience, and figure out for themselves what the answers to these questions are, what these, you know, concepts and questions may mean to them. So a super, again, I think effective way of providing supervision to folks who are on the front line. And I have an additional resource in my resource slide where you can get more information about that. And as a supervisor or manager, you can get training in this style of supervision. And it's also something employers can help employees seek out if it's not available within their organization. Okay, so this is something else that you own, that you get to control for yourself at work and in the ways that you are working with your clients. And I want to take a second and talk about curiosity right now, in the face of what's going on with so much pressure and stress. I think, again, it can short circuit us to look for quick solutions, to be kind of reactive in the way that we're offering help, to get more black and white, to get more definitive in the ways that we approach problem solving. Whereas what I think is most helpful is if we can stay creative and curious and expansive and come from this place of abundance. Curiosity, I think, is the cure for judgment. So a knee-jerk reaction to judge a client for one of their behaviors or for their life in total, the remedy for that is instead to be curious, like, I wonder why my client is doing this, or I wonder why they didn't take what recommendations I made, or I wonder why they did X, Y, Z. And so when you're curious, you open so many more doors to how you can preserve that good healing relationship with your client and create work that is fulfilling for you. You know, when you jump to judgment, or when you jump to thinking this is a good client versus a bad client, or this is a good thing that they did versus a bad thing that they did, you know, that can lead us down the path to rationing care, to treating clients in different ways based on whether or not they're good or bad, or they're doing things we like or we don't like, or we start to make these categories of things. That is the path to burnout. That is the path to us, you know, maybe offering things to good clients that we shouldn't be, and then feeling really taken advantage of when things don't turn out well. That is also the path to us not offering what we should be to other clients who deserve our help and our concern and our empathy. And so like withholding as a social service provider, and then kind of how does that break you down from the inside out? So I'm a big fan of curiosity and of humility and seeing the client as a teacher. And those are things I think early in my career I didn't get, I didn't understand. I perceived of social work as, you know, serving and helping and telling people maybe things they didn't know. And the truth is, we all know the ways we need to improve our lives. I knew I shouldn't eat the Cheetos. And I knew weeks ago I should have been taking media breaks. And I knew I should have signed up for the yoga class. And you know a bunch of stuff you're supposed to be doing today too. So the problem isn't that people don't know they should stop drinking, or that their partner is abusive and is not going to make a good spouse to them. But it's kind of being humble in those moments, learning about the client's life, and letting them kind of come to the forefront of what it will take for them to make different decisions, or to make different choices. So I'll give you one example of what I'm talking about, which is I was providing some direct client services to a homeless man who had some chronic, serious mental illness as well. And at the forefront of the things I thought we should be doing was getting him an ID, getting him some housing, kind of getting him off the streets, if you will, and getting him connected to social services. So if you had asked me, what do we need to be doing? That's what's top of my list. But in working with him, his big concern, and he raised it over and over and over again, was he had a sweater that when you connected a battery to it, it would light up. And he really wanted a battery for his sweater. And so it took me weeks of trying to get him housing and trying to get him an ID. And he agreed to do all these things with me, but they all kept falling apart, and he would miss our appointments, and it was just a big fat mess. And so I finally got a clue and got him a battery for his sweater, and he was happy. And after we kind of cleared that road bump, it wasn't like everything came up roses, but it was so much easier. And I don't know what that was for him. You know, in retrospect, I wonder if, you know, him being homeless and at night he's walking near the road, and, you know, it could have been a safety issue for him. I don't know. We didn't get to the bottom of that, but he needed that thing for me, and I was fortunate that I could provide it. And that's what it took for us to progress together. The opposite of that was when I worked with a separate homeless man, and I really thought he needed to be housed. And I pushed and pushed and pushed, and we did finally get the housing together. And within the first couple of weeks of him being housed, he had a camp out in his little apartment, complete with inviting friends, lots of alcohol. They had a campfire in the little apartment, and he got kicked out. So kind of the moral of that for me was, yes, I was able to push him into making these changes that were important to me, but it ended up not working out. And I should have been better at listening to what he wanted and what he thought the next steps were. If we had gone at his pace and I had been respectful of him and humble in what, in how I was performing social work, I would have avoided an awful lot of upset and you know, him feeling like a failure because of what had happened. So anyway, just hopefully some good stories and information for you about why these things are important and how they keep you away from burnout. Because if you push and push and push on a client because it's what you want, and even if they do it, it is likely to fail at some point, and then you feel that failure. And you know, over the course of a career, that's a sure way to kind of be a career ender, really. Okay, so yeah, I'm reading some of your comments. Yeah, so many scenarios like that. It's important to build a relationship. The relationship with your client really is the conduit to all healing. Anything you do in service of the relationship, you're not going to go wrong. Anything that you do, you know, kind of breaking apart the relationship is really problematic for your ability to be a helper and for you to feel good about the service you're putting out there. Okay, so another thing you can control at work in your service delivery is your expectations of yourself and of your clients and how you define success. And there's an awful lot of pressure from the outside world on how you should do this, and it's not always helpful. In fact, it rarely is helpful. Again, using domestic violence as an example, the outside world really only wants to know if I helped that victim get away from that offender. Did they break up the relationship? And the outside world views that as a success. And occasionally there are even funders who want to know, you know, how many times did you get that relationship to end? And that's really harmful to your ability to continue to steward yourself through your career, because you have no control over that. Whether or not that person stays or go, whether or not that person is housed, whether or not that person is able to reduce their symptoms of mental illness. You can offer care, you can offer love, you can offer your concern, your empathy, you can offer an environment that is conducive to change, but ultimately you do not control that decision. And so how are you setting up your expectations for your work in a way that is realistic and that you can control? I tell you, I often think of myself kind of as a farmer, and I'm spreading seeds out there, you know, and I'm hopeful that those seeds will come up, and I'm hopeful that you all will be watering those same seeds that I'm throwing out there, and together we can really help some folks create lives that are happier and healthier. And but all too often, I don't know what happens to those seeds. I don't know what happens to my effort, and that's okay. I don't have the expectation that, so under this pandemic, there could be the expectation that if somebody calls on a crisis line, that you're going to be able to bring them into shelter. I mean, that's not a realistic expectation right now, because there's an awful lot going on outside of your ability to do a really great crisis call. But if you kind of hitch your wagon to that star, it causes a lot of disappointment and a lot of pain and a lot of sense of failure, when that's not the reality. You may be changing the trajectory of people's lives left and right, and never have much evidence of it. It is really special, you know, when you hear from clients years later and they're doing better, or you see them at the supermarket and they look happier. But it is part and parcel with this work that we're doing that success is kind of amorphous, and it really has more to do with how you are coming to that interaction with the client in a really authentic, kind, compassionate way. And if you can do that over and over and over again, you are a success, and your efforts mean something. But holding on to that, you know, in the face of clients who are struggling and a world that has so many problems, it can be awfully difficult. It can be awfully difficult. All right, so I am going to recommend that if you have a piece of paper or a pen, even if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, if you go get a piece of paper and a pen, that you just jot down a quick resiliency plan. I know many of you are familiar with doing plans with clients, treatment plans, safety plans. Gosh, I don't know what all plans we do, but this is a plan for you. And it's not so much that you're going to go back and find this plan later, although you might, but it's the discipline of doing it and thinking it through and putting this information down on paper that will be helpful to you. So there's 4 parts to your plan, and each one of them are simple. The first is, on a regular basis, I will. And these are those things that you put in the chat box. I will garden. I will take time with my family. I will do yoga. I will eat healthy. I will reach out to somebody every single day so that I'm not lonely, or so that I'm surrounded by people that love and support me. But what are those things you're going to do proactively on a daily or weekly basis so that your nervous system is regulated and you have the best chance possible, particularly during this time? So I hope you're kind of making a list of that while I'm chatting at you. The second piece of your resiliency plan is, I know times are getting tough when, okay? And we talked about some of these earlier too, and you put in the chat box what's going on. So for me, my recipe, when I know things are too tough and I've got to back off the flame, is my eye is twitching, I'm having nightmares, I can't sleep. That's kind of the perfect storm for me. And that's when things are really out of whack. That's not just every now and then I don't get as much sleep as I want. You know, this is like, okay, legit time to reassess. I'm in a bad place. And then you have, if times get tough, I will. And this is kind of a more intensive effort that you will make, more than the stuff you're doing on a regular basis. But things you're committing to do if things get to that place. And Gina, thank you. I appreciate you're putting in like the things that you're willing to do on a regular basis. And it helps to make this commitment to other people. It really does. Is the only reason I signed up for that yoga class yesterday. So if times get tough, I will get some counseling. I will use my employer's EAP program. I will reach out to so-and-so coworker because I know they care about me and will shoot straight with me. I will take some time off. I mean, I see folks right now not taking any time off, and I get it. But if we just wait until this thing is over, A, we don't know how long we're going to be waiting, and B, it could just be too late. So, you know, how are we doing things in a sustainable way now and in the future? Taking time off, you know, whatever those kind of next level things are for you, I want you to get them down. And then the final piece of your resiliency plan is some things that you're not willing to sacrifice for work. Okay, we are social service workers. A lot of us are saying, there's nothing I won't sacrifice for my work. Okay, I get that. I was there. I did the whole martyr deal, like been there, done that. It just doesn't lead to a good place, guys. So what if we, you know, have some boundaries around this and actually put down what are those things your work can't take from you? They're too precious to you. They're too important. It leads to a bad place. And I'll tell you, for me, some of the things my work can't take is my peace of mind. It can't take my sleep. And it can't take so much family time that I don't have the time that I need with those folks. There are likely other things on your list and other things on my list, but it's worth doing this inventory for yourself because, you know, having a way to measure, okay, I'm in the red zone. Okay, I'm past my prime. I reached my expiration date. You know, how do you gauge that for yourself? And again, it's not that from time to time you're not going to have some difficulties with your job, but your job is different, and you, I believe, have a responsibility and can help manage this for yourself. This is possible. Okay, So we have, I'm going to skip that slide. We have about 10 more minutes together. I do want to go over the employer's role. And so if you're a supervisor or you're a manager or you have a supervisor or manager who might be open to some feedback, these are the things employers can be doing right now to help protect those people kind of running to the fire. And I believe that employers now have a moral obligation to be doing these things beyond just you should or wouldn't it be great if. It's concerning to me when I don't see employers picking up the slack, getting into a stance of being protective over their workers, doing what it takes to kind of reduce the load on them right now. That in my mind is really unacceptable. And if I had one critique of social services, which I'm super grateful to the career path that I was able to take, but my one critique is that we kind of eat our own. And what I mean by that is we take in employees who have had really difficult childhoods, usually, not always. We take in folks who have been traumatized, who want to do good in their communities, who want to help people because they were hurt. And then we put them in front of clients over and over and over again without the information and the protection that they need in order to stay healthy and kind of hang in there for themselves. And the result of that is something that I saw over and over again, which was some new employees don't last 6 weeks. It is the rare employee and that lasts 2 to 3 years. But after 2 to 3 years in a direct service position, it's pretty uncommon to see folks go beyond that, still be intact, still be friendly, still be great with clients. To see someone do that for their whole career, I've seen it maybe twice. And so that's something to really kind of take in, that for most of us, these professions we're in now will change and shift, and they should, for our own good and for the good of our clients and our families. But again, what can our employers be doing to kind of step up and take some of that off of workers' plates and make a workplace that's as safe and healthy and conducive to wellness as possible? So again, I've changed to black a few of these that I wanted to take a minute on that are, I think, really important right now. And a lot of them really harken back to this first one, which is realistic expectations for workload, particularly now. And there's ways for employers, supervisors to work with supervisees to figure out what is essential work right now and what is not. And so you'll see throughout this matrix a few other things like, how can we reduce the administrative burdens on staff right now? How can we get that out of the way? How can we, maybe reduce caseloads? How can we have rotate workers in Black here? And what that means is there a way for folks to do the more stressful jobs and then do some of the less stressful jobs and kind of bow in between those two? So can we set a day aside for paperwork for those folks who are feeling kind of crispy because they've been on the front line, or for those folks who hate paperwork and can't even think about paperwork right now? Maybe they move forward to the front line. How are we kind of shifting and structuring the work in a way that makes sense for our world today? Something else I feel really strongly about is about structural support for debriefing. So we certainly want to be debriefing with our coworkers in a sort of structured way and unstructured ways after crisis. But giving employees time outside of breaks, outside of lunch, to be talking both about work and not about work, just giving us time to decompress together. It's one of the most healthy things that you can do in this situation, is to have that support in an ongoing way, to not feel pressure from your boss that every minute has to be productive right now. That's really not realistic, and it's not good for us. And we shouldn't put that pressure on ourselves either. We talked about reflective supervision. I feel strongly that that's the right way to go, whether we're in a pandemic or not. And then having these internal discussions and transparency within your organization that managers and supervisors and leadership and frontline workers, that we are talking about this experience that we're having. And we're solution finding together, and we're listening to each other's voices. And it's, you know, it's not something we need to do every single minute of every single day. I mean, there comes a point of diminishing return, but how are we kind of digesting this as whole organizations in ways that are meaningful? And then finally, this employee recognition piece. And I had a really terrific supervisor when I was a young social worker named Jeanette Baca, and many of you know Jeanette. She does some contract work for the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and she's also a social work professor at Highlands University. And so on those days where it was really hard and traumatic things had happened and it was kind of beyond the pale, and I felt kind of wounded, she would take me for a Dr. Pepper. And I know that's like a silly thing that we came up. I don't know how we came to that together, but it was super meaningful to me. And it was a good chance for a reset, kind of like a hard reboot, if you will. And it gave me time with her and her attention, doing something frivolous, but again, it was a recognition in a way, but it was a lot more than that too. And different people like to be recognized in different ways. I mean, some people like their name called out at a staff meeting, and some people, oh my gosh, that'd be horrible. They'd rather you just give them a little personal note. But finding out ways to thank and recognize staff right now is really important. But remembering maybe not to do that so much. I have one on here in black that says no martyrs. And what I mean by that is the people who are burning the candle at both ends, who are, you know, trying to come in for extra shifts, who won't leave work, who are not going to pee when they need to go pee, who are, you know, obviously headed toward burnout. I see too many times where those are the staff that get recognized. And I get it. As someone who's been a supervisor and a manager, we love it when people are taking up the extra slack. But if it's at their expense, that's a message that we send to the whole staff that that's the way to be. And so how do we role model this behavior? And how do we not allow that to be kind of held up as kind of the highest form of social work, because it's not. And then creating a quiet space. Again, I don't care where it is. Maybe it's a hammock, maybe it's a beanbag somewhere, but just getting a space for you to go and have a quiet moment. And I see in the chat box y'all talking about how huge employee recognition is, and I couldn't agree more. All right, so finally, taking a second to think about the gifts of social work. You know, we've talked about some of the hardships. We've talked about some of what you're up against. There are some dire things happening in the world, and there's a lot of good that can come out of your practice of social work. And I've put up some of the ones that have real deep meaning for me. But if you have a second in your chat box here, just as we're wrapping up, if you can think about how social work has changed you for the better, or your social service work, or whatever role you're playing in serving people or serving those who serve others, how has it made you different? I can give you, for myself, I'm a much more patient person. I'm not a patient person, but I'm a much more patient person than I would have been otherwise. I feel like it's made me much more flexible. I think I have a better ability to listen, and really, I think I have a better handle on the fullness and kind of wholeness of life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I know some of that's kind of tough language, but this experience is really, it's changed me, and it's changing you too. We can't do this work without it changing us. So I think the question for you is, do you like who you're becoming? Do you like what you see in yourself? Do you like these things that it's doing to you, or do you feel like it's not helpful? And again, if that is your answer, ultimately, what changes can be made? And maybe you want to be the cool social worker at the bottom, and that's great. Not all of us will stay. In Esperanza, we called new advocates shiny pennies, because they were just really naive and enthusiastic, and I was a pretty shiny penny once. But yeah, all of this is just to say that how do you kind of keep track of that as you're going along. Great, and then here's your resources. The resources at the top are more pertinent to the information that I presented to you today. The ones at the bottom are just a few self-care resources that I feel like have been helping me through this. Upworthy is some really positive news. You won't find anything about murder hornets on Upworthy. So if you got to have your news, that's a great place to get it. And then if you ask for your phone. So thank you all so much for being here today. And for what you put into the chat, the fact that you have a deeper understanding and appreciation for human resiliency, oh my God, that's huge. Wonderful. Yeah, and thank you for all you do, and take good care of yourself, and yeah, thanks.